Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to you all. Life is a mix of successes and failures, hard work and sweat, grit and determination, and resilience are essential components in achieving success and overcoming failures. On the road to success, we face many adversities, and overcoming these help build resilience, confidence, and one's will to continue. Adversity often derails many from continuing their journey. Fear inhibits many successes. Challenges can make people more creative and look for new ways to their ultimate goal. Overcoming these adversities and facing the fears is what leads to one's ultimate goals. Today, we have with us individuals whose grit, determination, and resilience have paid off. Our first speaker this morning is Mrs. Jyotsna Kumar. Jyotsna, a late deafened mom to two humans and one cat, was diagnosed with sensorineural deafness at the age of 30. Now, she is the co-founder of Youngistan, a Pune-based support group that works towards empowering individuals with special needs and their parents. She is also a motivational speaker with Human Library and strongly believes in viewing life through the lens of infinite possibilities. When not in these spaces, you'll find her blogging, watching the latest crime thrillers thanks to subtitling, or cuddling her cat Syra. Over to you, Jyotsna.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Buddy Center. Thank you, Karen, for inviting me to share about my journey in this space. I'm Jyotsna, and my sharing here is about my journey with deafness, progressive nerve deafness, and how I have learned to accept it and its presence in my life. If you had asked me in my early 20s, I could never ever have known I would be diagnosed with deafness a decade later. My mother was profoundly deaf, and I was raised in a family where I didn't find her any less of a mother because she couldn't hear. Nonverbal cues, gestures, writing down things made it easier for me to communicate with her, and that was that. That deafness can be so invisible, yet so real, it hit me only when I was diagnosed with it. I was 30 then, mom to a 2-year-old, and a routine ENT checkup revealed that I had lost 60 decibels in both my ears. I refer to myself as late deafened because I acquired my loss after the development of speech and language. And I'm often asked, how do I speak so clearly or fluently? And the term late deafened actually helps the others to understand that there are different aspects to being deaf. And many individuals actually with hearing loss, they do identify with the functional level at which they see themselves. And so do I. And because I turned deaf much later in life, it was very unexpected and traumatic without doubt. I never learned sign language and could function primarily within my hearing world in terms of family and friends in the early years of my diagnosis. When I was diagnosed in 1997, I wasn't really sure what to do. All I knew was that I didn't wish to depend on someone else to hear for me. It was also in the 1990s, when we didn't have smartphones, technology, computers, captioning, and still use landlines. I did not handle the face very well, and some part of me, I think, chose not to accept it fully. But deep down, there was a part of me that knew that, I wanted to lead a fulfilling life at some level, and I would have to get a grip on the emotion that I was feeling, and I had to work at helping myself to move forward. My ENT's prognosis was not very positive. He was clear that it was a steadily progressive nerve deafness. It would need management through hearing aids, avoiding any strong medication that were ototoxic, loud music, earphones, and stress. And I think my only thought was then that, whatever happens, I need to hear my daughter's voice. She was then 2 and growing up. Two things happened to me post this detection. I sought counseling, acquired hearing aids. And believe me, the first was a lot easier than the second. Opting for hearing aids is one thing, but getting used to them is a journey I really find hard to explain because a hearing aid does not restore the quality of normal hearing. Wearing them is not the same as wearing glasses. Sounds are amplified to such an extent that it can be very unnerving. And the process of fine tuning of hearing aids, especially the digital ones, it takes patience, time, repeated visits to the audiologist. It took me 2 years and many audiologists later to finally get used to wearing hearing aids. think counseling sessions actually helped me to view this disability from a very different angle, a kind of a shifting of focus. The fact that I was deaf, yes, but was I allowing myself, to stop myself from doing the things I really could do still? I think it was all about the way that I was perceiving this disability. I actually resumed working part-time. I got used to being open about my deafness, telling others I don't hear. I also got used to a silent world once I removed the hearing aids. I also started delving into inner work with yoga, meditation, working with emotion that I would not have addressed otherwise, my Buddhist practice, chanting. And over time, I started lip reading. But there again, I mean, it's kind of a reminder for me to mention this, that those who are late deafened do not automatically become great lip readers. When someone asks me if I can lip read, I usually respond like, what did you say? Because not all words, phonemes can be lip read. There's added visual distractions of facial hair, dim lighting. It's quite a skill, which becomes even more difficult to lip read. So right now I use a combination of lip reading, I use hearing aids, I sometimes wing my way through situations, but not without exhaustion. The exhaustion that I usually experience being deaf is listening fatigue. I'm always trying to listen if I'm in a group. I usually miss the nuances of jokes and conversations, do get stuck in many social situations. And the one myth that I would like to shatter as a person who's deaf is that a hearing aid does not fix one's hearing loss. The communication demands of a particular situation is variable. The communication barriers in those situations are variable. And I think a lot depends upon one's own adjustment to that particular deafness that they're experiencing. So where am I today? I'm already at 110 decibel loss, few more to go. Some frequencies on my hearing aid losses are much worse than the other. I'm not really sure how I'm going to manage once I've lost it all, but I think for now I'm doing the best I can. I help other parents. I work at part of support groups. I empower them, enabling them. I also find time more in silence internally rather than the external world. I'm extremely grateful for technology. I'm subtitling, so I don't miss movies. And actually, hearing aid support for the deaf like me has been best managed only because of an audiologist who I have relentlessly hounded each week for fine tunings. And I never gave up. He never gave up. And a good audiologist is a blessing because he or she kind of tunes in into that patient's deafness, the kind of hearing loss they have, their lifestyle, and they actually can suggest the best hearing aid that can suit you. And now, thanks to my iPhone, hearing aids, Bluetooth, mic, and my audiologist, I can manage online. I also use captioning whenever I can. And I'm also grateful for the fact that I can afford the hearing aids. They're not cheap. I'm actually very delighted that I've reached a stage in my life now with a very profound hearing loss. I can laugh about it, or let me put it this way, I can hold that label of deafness lightly. I do find myself straddling two worlds, a deaf world and the hearing world. I'm somewhere between the two. It's not very easy. And for me, it hasn't been just about overcoming life's challenges. I think the journey has also been about accepting them very squarely as it came into my life. And that's my sharing of the journey, and heartfelt thanks for watching and listening. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Jyotsna. That was very motivating. Thank you for your share. Next, we have Ramona Rodrigues. First, I would like to share something with you. I have two heroes in my life. One is my daughter Kanika, and one is my sister. And I'm privileged to have my sister with us here today. She was always that perfect elder sister, always there to fall back on, whether it was teaching me the whole year's portion one evening before exams. Yes, right through school, right through college, teaching me maths and accounts. She's always been the quiet, considerate, hardworking person. Unlike her, I was the rebel, the tomboy, and always on the go. Absolute opposites. I still remember the night when she had her first seizure. It seems just like yesterday. I don't think she realized the impact she had on the family, but yes, it definitely had a profound impact on me. Ramona has been an epileptic for the last 33 years. She was not born an epileptic, but suddenly suffered her first attack in February 1988. It occurred due to a fright when some electric work was being done in the house. Fortunately, she had completed her post-graduation and also had started working in a government organization. So let us hear more from her. Ramona, unmute yourself.
Thanks, Karen, for inviting me here. I feel really privileged to be on your show. And thanks for all the lovely things you said about me. Okay, so the first time that I had this attack, as you said, was in February 88 when some electric work was going on, and I was scared at that time. And that was the beginning of the first attack of epilepsy, and thereon I had never stopped getting these seizures. After I had got this government job and I had these seizures for the first time, I thought that my complete what do you say? I didn't have any future left in the organization, but somehow with the you say, with all the support that I got from my parents and family members, it helped me to move on. I appeared for a number of examinations in my organization, which helped me move up the ladder. And even though I just joined as an assistant or a typist in the organization, I just moved up the ladder just by merely giving examinations. And I've reached a post just now, where I'm a deputy manager in the New India Assurance Company Limited. And I have a number of people who work under me. And I have surpassed all the people who have joined the organization with me. And I'm really proud to say that this is all because of the help and support that I have got from all my family members and all the people in my organization also. People in my organization, when I had got the first attack, were really surprised. They were shocked. They didn't know what to do. And they called my people from home and told them to come and take me home because they didn't know what to do. But gradually, I informed them, or rather told them what was to be done in case of an attack, what first aid I could be given, and also informed them, gave them telephone numbers of people at home who they could contact and ask me to be taken home. And now I've reached a point where I can handle myself alone, where I can be independent. I can alert somebody when I'm unwell. No doubt, there are times when I cannot help myself, but I do try to do whatever I can. So this is in short whatever I could tell you. And thank you very much for calling me here so that I could share with you whatever I have experienced. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ramona, for sharing with us. Yes, it's been a long journey, but we've got there. It has been worth the efforts, the trials, the hard work that you have put in definitely has paid off. We have Harshad. Harshad had a spinal injury from a bike mishap in 1991. He went through rehab in 1992 in UK. He went on to finish his graduation and worked for 10 years before post-graduation in the US and since working in Smart Inn. Arshad, will you please join us on your video?
One moment. Sorry, this video is giving some problem. One moment.
No problem.
There we go.
Lovely.
Hi.
Harshad
Thank
is
you, Karen, and easier in that respect. I definitely would like to tell you that. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, Harshad, please go ahead.
Okay, I don't know which part he said. It was nice to hear Jyotsna and Ramona.
Harshad, can you hear us? Harshad? I think this line is bad. We shall wait. Harshad, can you hear us? Harshad? What you can do is log out and log in again otherwise. You can send him a message on.
And way to.
Harshad, we can't hear you at all. Harshad, stop. Harshad, we can't hear you. You'll have to start from the beginning. We did not hear you at all. We can't see you either, but that's all right. If you can just, can you hear me? Harshad, can you hear me? Harshad, if you can hear me, please log out and log in again. It'll be simpler and faster. Okay, I've just sent him a message. Hopefully you can see the message. Harshad. Excuse, I'm going to make him a call. Oh, he's come back. He's got a second phone. Okay.
Hi.
Harshad, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't.
Don't use the video, only use the audio. I think that's the problem.
I don't know where I dropped off.
We haven't heard you get started as yet. So you'll have to start from the beginning. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry, you'll have to get started from the beginning.
I don't know where I dropped off.
We did not hear anything you said, so you'll have to start from the very beginning. So sorry.
Oh, okay.
So sorry.
No problem. I think some problem at my end.
No problem. Please
I
go ahead.
wanted. It was nice hearing Jyotsna and Ramona. I think my journey has been comparatively easy. I met with this accident about 30 years ago, where I lost my ability to walk, paralyzed, chest down. Uh, and the only right choice that I probably made was to move on. My motivation was that I didn't want my parents to feel that I'm a burden on them, or that I could not do anything that they had hoped I would do. So they took me to Bombay for basic treatment, and then we chose to go to UK for my rehab program. I think that part of my journey was extremely important. And I think if it would help parents with any similar kind of problems, whether it's a physical disability or mental disability, or for that matter, any kind of treatment or any kind of a situation that you face in life. What I wanted to specifically point out is the way they went about uh, training in the program. They looked at the case very, very comprehensively. Their sole purpose was not to get me to walk again, because after a spinal injury, there's virtually no way that your spine will get mended and you will start walking again. So there was no attempt to try and fix my spine. The whole idea was to put me into a rehab program which gets me into a normal life with the spinal injury. At this point, I would just like to tell you, I had another friend who met with a similar accident about 6 months before mine. And in the last 30 years, his attempt has been to someone that can work with him for him to or there would be a way to walk. It would reach me and it would reach anybody in the world. So I decided to basically just do what I wanted to do and get on with this. I told this friend of mine that if there is any alternative medicine, if there is, Ayurvedic guy or allopathic treatment or some way that is being researched to make this work, I would send the person to you. You can try it out, and if that works to you, send him back to me, and I will use that method to get myself to walk. But I don't want to spend my time trying to find a cure. And I think that decision also helped me a lot. I have just gone ahead and done things that I always wanted to do. As I was mentioning to you, the key was the rehab program in UK. Um, Two things that were very, very critical in the way they went about it is one, they are not trying to make you walk again. They are trying to make you uh, work around your injury or your disability. So they are not giving you any false assurances or hope that you will walk again. So that sets a lot of things in the right perspective for the patient. The second thing is that it's a very integrated program. It takes care of just about everything, uh, physical therapy, your occupational therapy, uh, developing your muscles that are required without the use of your legs. So your upper body has to become stronger. The techniques to be used to move around without your legs, to get you to drive your car, just about everything. So it was a 6-month program, and it was like a boot camp. They made me get up morning at 6:37. The program started at 8 o'clock and it went on till 5 o'clock. Just when you have met with an accident and you have no idea what is happening, you are made to do this from 8 to 5 every morning is quite a task. They gave me a wheelchair, which was about 40 kilos. I use a wheelchair now, which is about 13 kilos. But that time when I had no comfort level with using a wheelchair, I was given a 40 kilo wheelchair and was made to go cross country so that I could get used to using a wheelchair. So they used to use the term, we have to be bad to you to be good to you. And I can relate to that now because things have been made so much easier for me. So there were so many techniques that they taught us of, transferring into a car, moving out of the bed or whatever. There were some techniques that I did not use for 20 years. But then when I needed it, I knew how to use that technique to move forward, to get on with the things. So all in all, what I'd like to say that whenever there is a situation like this, it's important that you have an integrated program, comprehensive, which takes care of all the aspects that are required in a particular situation, and just work towards it and make sure that all of it is done at the same time, simultaneously, rather than I've seen a few people who have met with a similar accident. They are looking at one aspect of it and trying to address one aspect of it. I think it's important that all of it is done. And in this 6 months, I learned about everything that I know today and that I've lived by today in the last 30 years. And there's nothing that has stopped me. So a comprehensive integrated program is necessary. The other thing that I noticed, which is a little different from how the doctors here function and the doctors in UK function, is that you have a single consultant doctor who is not really a specialist in anything. He's like your general physician. He is the person who coordinates with, so in my case, there was a nephrologist, there was an orthopedic surgeon, there was a physiotherapist, there was an occupational therapist, and there was a skin specialist. So what I see in India, and I had, before going to UK, I had that experience myself, is that each one is a specialist in his own, and you approach them independently and appoint them as your physician, or your specialist, or whatever. Each one comes and gives you some instructions of what needs to be done from his specialty point of view. So if the orthopedic surgeon comes, he talks about what needs to be done orthopedically. Then the spine specialist, the neurologist comes, and he advises you what needs to be done neurologically. And then you have the nephrologist come and he prescribes you some medicines. And so you understand that everybody comes and gives their own instructions, and you are not a medical consultant. You have no idea what is right, who to listen to. And if there are 5 medicines prescribed, 2 of them may be doing the same thing, but you don't know which one to select. And if you select one particular medicine, which the nephrologist suggested to you, and do not take the one that the neurologist suggested to you, then he gets upset. So, managing egos of all these doctors and making a choice of what to do and what not to do is really a challenge, which you don't go through in at least in the institute that I was in UK. And that's how I believe they function. You have this one person who coordinates with all of them, sits with them on a weekly meeting, with each of those consultants in a meeting room, and discusses your case. he then comes out and tells you what needs to be done. So you are not struggling to first understand what each one of them told you and then making your choices. I think if somehow, since we don't have that system in India, if we create this situation for ourselves by selecting a general physician and asking him to coordinate with all these other consultants or specialists, I think that may help. I think that made a lot of difference for me. So an integrated program and a team that works collectively, guided by one single person, uh, will make your rehab or treatment more effective, as I see from my past experience. Um, so after that, I came back from the UK. The other thing that made a lot of difference in my life, in my journey, was that my parents, my father arranged, get together of all friends and families on the second day of my return to India. Uh, just called everybody and said, "Here is Harshad. Meet him and get back to your work, and let him get back to his work," which was very important. Otherwise, you know how it is. People come and do a visitation, and you repeat the whole story of what you did and how you did and what you're going to do. Uh, my dad just cut that off completely. He just made sure that everybody sees me. I see everybody, and the next day morning, I was back at work. What I was doing before. Just to go back a little, I was working full time since I was 16 in our hotel business. And what my father also did was 2 months before I came back to India, he started sending me the same work that I was doing in India. So he got me to speed before I got back. And then this get together where I met people, and the next day I was at work knowing exactly what I wanted to do, because in the last 2 months I had updated myself for what was happening back in office. So I think that transition was very, very important, and that was planned by my dad. Uh, so anybody in that situation, a caretaker, if he can make this transition easy, I think it helps a lot. It does make it easy for the person to move forward. The other thing that really helped me was my friends. I was a part of a group, road track group in Pune before I met with this accident, and I was supposed to be the president the year that I met with the accident. So when I came back, my group of friends made sure that I become the president of road track the following year. That also helped me a lot. It got me into the social setup, moving out, meeting people, organizing events, uh, while I was also working back in office. So the whole transition was kind of managed by my parents, by my friends, and that really, really just made me move forward. Uh, I had a great time. I remember we had organized, while I was the president, we had organized a rock show with Remo, and it was a successful event. And 1 year later, Remo was visiting Pune again, and he saw the way we were functioning and how people around me were organizing the event, or just doing everything. It actually motivated him to write a song. So he came back after a year and said, "This is what I have made for you. I have written the song, I have sung it, and I've played all the instruments." Quite an inspiring song. So I think everybody around me made a lot of difference. A lot of support comes in when you just choose to move forward rather than look back and see what were the reasons of what happened to you and why it happened to you. Um, After working for almost 10 years after my accident, I chose to uh, pursue my education in the US. I wanted to do a hotel management before I met with my accident, but of course things were very different after my accident. But that dream remained. Um, the other thing that happened in those 10 years is I started wondering how much of what I was doing was because of my own thing, and how much of it was because of my family's support, including financial support. I didn't know what I was doing and what I was earning was something that was just handed down to me, or something that I was capable of earning on my own. So I chose to go to the US with a one-way ticket. uh, I had already applied to Cornell, and I did not take any money from the family for my education. Uh, I just took a one-way ticket to the US. I raised a loan there for my education, um, for my food, for my accommodation. Fortunately, I got some good internships where I could make some money to repay that loan. And at the end of the program, I got it's called the Jonas Wheel Fellowship, which paid for my entire education. So I managed to get my education paid off for without taking any kind of support from family. My parents were obviously very angry at that time that I chose to do something like this. Uh, but in hindsight, I think it was the best thing for me to do. It made me even more independent. It gave me the confidence that I can uh, earn on my own. I then took up two jobs. I worked at a company called Accor, which is a large hotel group in the headquarters in North America, uh, in Dallas. I worked there for some time, and then I worked with another company called Cargill in their finance acquisition team. They acquire about 10 to 15 companies every year across the world. So that exposure and the kind of people that I met there and the friends that I made uh, also made a lot of difference. I just believe that two things is one, if you choose to move forward, a lot of people are there to help you. And if you ask for help, you get the help. There are a lot of people who are hesitant to ask for help, right? I think you need to ask. If you don't ask, you're not going to get it. And you make great friends, you meet great people, uh, things just work out. There are a lot of incidences which I don't think time permits, but things just work out. It's just the choice that you make. uh, the other thing that I also did was I have been very fond of flying, and I wanted to do this skydiving. So I went and to Orlando on one of my trips, and also did skydiving, uh, which again, it just makes sure that you are confident about just doing everything that can be done. One last thing that I would like to share with you is that a few years ago, 3, 4 years ago, there's a doctor who approached me and uh, said that there is a way that a treatment that he has come up with, which could help me walk again. And I was not really keen, as I said at the beginning. I wanted to just move on. If there was a definitive cure, I would definitely like to um see myself walking. But I didn't want to be a guinea pig or a trial for somebody. So I went, I heard him out. He's done some great work. But I told him, look, it's been 27 years that I have not been walking. I have been able to do whatever I wanted to do. There's nothing that has stopped me except, of course, jogging or playing cricket. Other than that, everything that I wanted to do, I've been able to do. Uh, walking is not going to change anything for me at this point in time. uh, it is not my priority anymore. I have other things that I would like to do more than walking today, right? Don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't want to walk, but I don't want to be a trial for something. If there is a definitive way that you do these three things, and at the end of it, this thing is going to work, I'm going to uh, happily do it. But if you're going to tell me that let's try this, this may work, this may not work, I don't want to disturb what I am already doing and what has helped me all these years. Thank you very much for having me and listening to me. I don't know if it is of any help to anybody, but if it does, I would be really, really happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshad. That was very informative and a lot of food for thought, I would say. Yes, in India, we do have problems with when we have a child with special needs. We go see a neurologist, a psychologist, a speech therapist, and uh, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, and we're going from one therapist to the other. It definitely would help, having a common person taking care of the needs, and it's extremely difficult. So yes, we will learn. We have lots to learn. Thank you so much for your share. Next, we have with us Shomita Basu. Shomita finds joy in solving problems. Dealing with her own disabilities made her step into designing innovative adaptive clothes and making fashion inclusive. Shomita has worked for nearly 18 years in an international development practitioner and journalist. She has extensively worked at the grassroots across India with underserved communities, building inclusive models of sustainable change. She has written extensively on social development issues in mainstream and academic journals, and also made a few documentaries. She holds a master's degree in development studies from ISS, The Hague, Netherlands, and a PG diploma in journalism from Asian College of Journalism, ACJ, Chennai. She is a recipient of the Netherlands Fellowship Program, NFP, by the Dutch government. Happy to have you with us here, Shomita. Shomita, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. And well, you really didn't have to, because I think Harshad just said everything I've even thought of saying. So it's all covered, and we are good to go. It's early end. Thanks, Harshad, for starting the sort of setting the tone of the conversation. I just start a little bit about like what my challenges are physically, just so that, because this is titled Overcoming Challenges, and I think it's a good idea to know what the challenges are. I was a non-disabled person. I had a very flexible body, actually, and a very agile, mobile, both body and personality. I trained dancer since I was 2.5 years old. I went to a dance school even before I went to academic school. So I learned how to, dance before I learned my ABCDs. Martial arts till my late 20s. And that it's actually, so a lot of people say, if you're exercising, doing this, we're doing that, you really cannot fall sick. But I felt sick while doing all my yoga and my martial arts and everything. So I had this chronic illness. I started started feeling the problem around when I was 28, and it just started getting worse. And in between, I also went to the Netherlands to do my master's. So I have the experience of healthcare system from two different countries. Got back. So it just kept regressing. And then, from a crutch to a wheelchair, from a wheelchair to be completely in bed. There was a time when only my, just my neck was moving to a small extent. And if I could rest my hand on the bed, just my fingers would be tapping. That's all the movement I had in my body. And I have gotten to a better place than that currently, but I am still quite severely disabled physically with different, kinds of problems. So how did I overcome the challenge? I guess I was so busy dealing with it. I never thought of it as a challenge. That was first step. And the more important part for me was to really understand what I can do. So, obviously I had a very agile work profile. I used to travel a lot. I very clearly couldn't do that. So I took my time and I started listing out what is it that I can do. And interestingly, what I found is that I still can do so many things that if I start doing all of them, I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't have time for it. And it's the same even when I had a completely non-disabled body, right? Like there were so many things that one could do, but you could only do a part of it. You couldn't do everything anyway. But yeah, of course, the choices were different. So I never felt that, oh my God, I'm missing out on things. I just realized that there are other things that I need to explore, which I never did before. And I started doing them. And I started getting good at it also. So in fact, started learning about fashion and designing. And I have started an entire clothing line on clothes which are easy to wear, comfortable, and gives you a better scope of independence if you have any kind of physical challenge. This kind of clothing line is not even there in India as such. So when I am doing something which is so exciting, I think one stops thinking about the things one can't do. um, a lot of people started saying I was a dancer, and I started correcting them. I said, if I have been dancing since I was 2 years old, I guess I'm really pretty much a dancer. There's no was and is to it. It is who I am. But how do I express it? So I, of course, wouldn't be, jumping on the floor anymore. But there are many ways of dancing. So I started redefining a lot of things which I love doing, and I would still do them. And the first thing I learned about handling all these challenges is that I would do things for myself. And the moment I started on that journey, I think things became easier because the standard set is by myself and the achievements were for me. And I think that's what mattered at the end of the day. What really mattered for me was also that I am financially independent. So I started figuring out ways in which I can be financially independent. So I started, there was 1 year where I did not, I completely didn't do any work because it was very difficult. So I started figuring out technology to help me, started figuring out the kind of jobs that I can do right now and the people I can work with. So it's very important, as Harshad had said, to, have the right kind of people around you, be it at work, be it as friends, be it in anything. And it's quite magical. The moment you have your intentions right, people you did not even know existed would just come in your life. And there's no way that you can plan it. So a lot of people even say, like, how much do you plan? I used to be far more spontaneous. So right now, I of course do have to plan a lot. Like I have to plan if the restaurant I'm going to has wheelchair access or not. I have to plan if the travel that I am going, if I fall sick, what are my backup options? While I plan all of this, I also have let a lot of things loose, knowing that if I could have survived so much and till this far, I have already trained myself to handle something that will come my way. So that's okay. So there's the moment I get anxious, that's when things will fall apart. So I'll just have to go forward without anxiety, and plans don't work out most of the time. So that's fine. So I think the attitude of just going ahead and saying, it's fine. I have a plan. If it doesn't work out, something else will. And I'll have to be prepared for that. I have to be flexible enough for that. So as I started losing the flexibility of my body, I think I really started gaining the flexibility of my mind and my attitude and who I really was. The next thing I feel, what really, actually I did what Harshad had said. I finally got a GP and I told that person that, look, I cannot be running around and doing all this, coordination business between all the doctors and whatever you guys are saying and this medical terminology. Let me know if you know somebody that you're comfortable working with. And I'll see if I'm also comfortable working with the same specialist or not. And if that's the case, I would want you to be the point person for my conversations. And that worked magically well. Like that really worked well for me. Interestingly, I also found another institute in Bangalore where they not only have different specialists coming together and talking to each other, but they also have different systems of treatment like Ayurveda, naturopathy, and allopathy, and everything. And the doctors talk amongst themselves to figure out what to do with the patient. So for someone like me, who, so whatever recovery I have made till now, a lot of people say, the doctors actually, they say, oh my God, this is like a miracle. So that kind of miracle, I think, was possible only because I went to a place where the doctors were talking amongst themselves and not giving me the stress to figure out what to do. And I was very clear of that. I said, I'm the patient. It's my body. I have the right to choose, but I am not a doctor. So I do not have enough information to take a decision which is, given to me by bits and pieces. That worked really well for me. And giving away, so learning to trust another person, be it whatever you are doing, that was a huge thing. Because I think when you are going through a lot of physical problems, whatever they are, if you have an added stress to it, it really makes it worse. So I started working with people I can trust. I started going to doctors I can trust. And if I don't trust the doctor, I just don't go there anymore. Like, there have been so many doctors I've visited and I said, okay, this is not the relationship I want. So I only started being in places where I could be myself, I could trust, and I could tell people about my vulnerabilities without feeling any problem. That can also happen when you are strong yourself. So I would do a lot of meditation. I would do a lot of, very deep breathing. In fact, in the initial days, I would only do very deep breathing. And I started figuring out that if these are my vulnerabilities, what are my strengths? And, once I felt very comfortable in that, once I knew what I am all about, then telling people what I don't have was not a big problem for me. That doesn't mean that I never feel sad. And that doesn't mean that I am always feeling like on top of the world, or I never feel extra vulnerable, or, any of those emotions. I feel them, and I feel them probably more often than I can even care to count. So there also, luckily I have a very, very close, intimate set of friends that I trust. And more, sometimes even just myself, just having a silent period to myself, just to let yourself cry, let yourself feel, because it's human. And I think it's very important to, just because you have an illness and you have to lead a life, not to think that you are above it, or not to think that you're super brave, I don't know, a fighter, all of that. You're just another human being at the end of the day. And you can cry and you can feel horrible. And that doesn't make you weak. It just makes you another person. If you find a friend who can understand that, and please find that friend, because that friend is going to be the most important person in your life. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be anyone. But that person who doesn't tell you that, oh my God, don't cry. If you cry, what will happen? You don't want that panic. You want somebody to say, okay, if you want to cry, just cry. I'll get you whatever, chocolate or coffee or something, and somebody who will sort of help you cheat. So, maybe you're not supposed to have chocolate, but so what? If you have it once in 6 months, believe me, you're not going to die. And that's fine. So I think the moment you start living life saying, it's all right, it's fine, deal with it. I'll just tell you a very short story or by the incident of my life, which I think will, really put together this attitude of mine. So I was really sick. I was taking a lot of medicines, and because of one side effect of one medicine, I was losing my eyesight. And I'm somebody who is who really believes in listening to her body. So yes, if you're sick, or even if you're not sick, please listen to your bodies. They talk to you all the time. And most of the time when we fall sick is because we don't really listen to them. So listen, if you don't like the taste of something, or if your child doesn't like the taste of something, don't force the child saying that, people are dying in Somalia. Just pack that food and send it to Somalia if you want, but don't force a child to eat it. So I started listening to my body, and I was very quick to understand that I was losing my vision. It wasn't that clear. So I kept going to ophthalmologists, and they said, some of them said, yes, you are. One of your eyes are particularly bad, but we don't know what caused it. And because of my previous work experience, I have worked as a medical anthropologist. So I knew that there was some connection with the medicine. I said, I'm taking these medicines. Are you sure it's not? No, it's not. And you know how doctors are like, you're a medical anthropologist. You're not really a medical practitioner, which is true, but at least take my words seriously and, look into. So they were going by the textbook. By that textbook, if that medicine had to affect my eyes, I would first lose my color sightedness. So that didn't happen. I wasn't colorblind, and then it would have affected the blurring which I was experiencing. So I kind of, did not follow the textbook, but that's what our bodies are. That's what medical science is. It's not an exact, this and that. It's an art form in itself if you're diagnosing someone. So anyway, then I went, kept going. So then he said, but I think I can handle it. I can't give you back your vision, but I can stop it from getting worse. So I was like, hold on, you don't know what got me wrong in the first place. So how will you stop that? So, I used something which is common sense, which by the way, most doctors don't like patients using. It's like, oh my God, she has common sense. No, I don't like her. So then I as I said, I kept going to doctors with whom I felt comfortable. It was not about them curing me. It was just about them talking to me in a way which made logical sense to me. So then I went to this doctor and who finally said, yeah, this medicine you should immediately stop. This is what is hurting you. I was like, thank you, God, this makes sense. She has figured out the root cause. And then I said, okay. And then she said, I don't know if you will ever get your sight back, because there's no treatment for it. And then she said, thank God you came to us as soon as you did, because most people who go through this come to us so late that really, at least now you can see, yeah, it's bad and everything, and hopefully it will not get worse. The reason I was sent to her, she's a neuro-ophthalmologist, so a super specialty, was because when I went to the hospital, the general ophthalmologist saw me and she kept really charging at me. She kept saying, but you can see. I said, you can read. And I think I really lost my temper. And when I lose my temper, luckily I just get sarcastic. I don't shout. So I just said, of course I can read. I never said I'm illiterate. I cannot see. That's the problem. And you're showing me really big, she was testing me with like really big letters. I said, they're so big, anybody can see them. And if you're not illiterate, you can read them. I am not able to see the last line, which I could even 2 months back. And she kept arguing with me, but that's supervision. Why do you need supervision? I was like, this argument is so not required. Like, I don't need supervision. I had it. If I'm losing it, there must be some reason for it. So before I lose even my normal vision, can you stop that? So, so she kept arguing with me. I just simply moved out. I said, I don't want you to treat me. And that's something, again, the doctors are not in India, not used to hearing, like the patient saying, because she started threatening me. If you don't keep quiet, I will not, Or if you don't cooperate, I will not test you. I said, if you keep hurting me like this, because she was holding my neck in a very, very painful way, and I have a very painful neck. So she's like, yeah. I said, if you don't know how to, diagnose me and touch me properly, I don't want you to treat me. Just stay away. And she was really surprised. So I think at some point you should have the courage of saying that it's okay. It's my life. It's my body. And I decide what the boundaries are. Nobody else should decide that. Doesn't matter. Even doctors. And by the way, doctors are not God. Please tell yourself that 1,000 times before you meet them. They're human beings. I moved out. I made a complaint. And because of that complaint, the management sent me this neuro-ophthalmologist. And she was a godsend for me. Like, she handled it so well. And then she also told me, I'm glad you came this early. I said, well, but your colleagues were dismissing me. She said, yes, because we are not used to seeing patients who come to us this early, who are this used to knowing their body. You did not dismiss your body. That was good. And then she said another thing. She said, just give your body 3 to 4 months, see if it heals itself. And that's exactly what happened. Within 3 to 4 months, my vision got back. It's still not at 100% where it used to be, but it is much better. It is like probably around a 95%, 90, maybe even a 98%. But there was this time when everybody thought I'm going to go blind. And my physiotherapist, he said, oh my God, how are you feeling? Like, you're not crying, you're not doing anything. I said, yeah, at this moment, I am not crying. Maybe at some point I will. But I know that I have lost my legs, I have lost my hands, I've lost my fingers, and I'm still doing well. So even if I lose my vision, I'm pretty sure I'll be fine. I'll work something out. I think at some point, if you have that faith in yourself, the world around you, the right people come to you, the right things happen. And I have no way of explaining this. I have no way to prove it, but I've experienced it way too many times to not share this. So if you ever feel that you are in company of people who are not in your best interest, it doesn't matter what people will say, just move away. Be the person that you want to meet, and you will find people coming to you, and you will meet the right people. Sometimes I met the right people even for 5 minutes, but I needed them in those 5 minutes, and it works out. So I really hope you find your people, but please don't stay with those who will give you negativity, who will tell you like, kya karm kiya aapne? It is a punishment for you. Oh my God, you poor thing. Because I've had a lot of them. I heard them. I just moved out, and I found a bunch of people who just was happy for who I was, and who made me happy for the things around me. And finally, I think this is the most important thing. We tend to forget the caregiver. It's very important that the caregiver has a way out, like a time out to socialize, or find other caregivers who they can talk to and feel a little relieved with, or more confident about. Or caregiving, I think, from my point of view, it is far more difficult than being the patient. So if there should be some way, some mechanism for the caregiver to feel cared for. So I think these things would really help in just going forward one step at a time, one day at a time. Thinking about 10 years has been very, very scary for me. So for me, it's just one step at a time. Do what I can do. I can do this today, I'll do it. If I can't do that today, it's okay, I'll not do it. It's fine. So my own standards of it. And my mom is my main caregiver. There have been times when I've just kicked her out of the house and saying, just go watch a movie, I don't want to see your face. And, stuff like that. So something like that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Amita. That was very motivating and very, very inspiring. Thank you so much for your share. A truly motivating and inspiring afternoon by all of you. All I can say is thank you so much. I'm sure anybody and everybody watching this program has got something out of it. Something. For me, it has been so much learning this afternoon and so much to take away. Right from the need to believing in yourself, being positive, taking responsibility for your life. accepting the change, finding that silver lining. Yes, we have to keep moving forward. Just an amazing share by everyone. Thank you all so much for everything, and God bless you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.